I went into surgery believing my husband would be waiting to hold my hand when I woke up. But the first thing I heard was his whisper in my ear. "You weren't supposed to survive." In that moment, my entire world cracked. Suddenly the strange signatures, the missing money, the drink he insisted I finish, they all made sense. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't safe. This is how I discovered the man I loved had planned my death. And how I survived the final attempt he made to stop me from leaving alive. Before we continue with this story, make sure to subscribe to the channel as we have a special story that'll be released soon. The morning of the surgery felt strangely calm, the kind of quiet that usually settles over a house before a long-planned trip. My husband, Marcus, moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, pouring coffee into a travel mug, checking the clock, reminding me of the time as if punctuality mattered more than comfort. I watched him from the table, trying to swallow the tightness in my throat, telling myself it was only nerves. The doctors had reassured me repeatedly that the procedure was routine. Complex, yes, but safe. People had this surgery every day and walked out of the hospital a week later. I told myself that Marcus was simply anxious. A concerned husband. A man who didn't like hospitals. Someone who was showing care in the only way he knew how. But every time his eyes met mine, something flashed behind them. Too quick to interpret, too faint to name. A flicker of something I mistook for stress. By the time we arrived at the hospital, the air had grown colder. The automatic doors opened with a hiss that reminded me of a sigh. Nurses moved with quiet urgency. Wheelchairs glided across polished floors, and the faint smell of antiseptic clung to everything. Marcus walked slightly ahead of me, checking in with the receptionist, signing forms, answering questions before I even processed them. It struck me as odd then. How confident he was with my information. How fast he signed my name on a clipboard without looking at me for confirmation. I brushed it off. He always handled paperwork. He said it was easier that way. When they finally called my name, he squeezed my shoulder, told me he'd be right behind me, told me everything would be fine. His voice was soft, too soft, like a lullaby given to lull a child into trusting sleep. I clung to it anyway. The pre-op room felt colder than the hallway. Machines beeped steadily from behind curtains, and nurses moved in and out with polite smiles. I changed into the gown, folded my clothes, handed over my wedding ring. The anesthesiologist asked me questions. History, allergies, medications. Everything felt routine until Marcus leaned down and kissed my forehead. It should have comforted me, but there was a stiffness to the way he held my hand, as though he were holding something fragile he didn't quite want to keep. "You're going to do great," he said. Only now do I realize he never said, "I'll be here when you wake up." The sedative began to creep into my veins, warm and heavy. My eyelids fluttered as the ceiling blurred, and the last thing I saw before everything dissolved was Marcus watching me with an unreadable expression. Not fear, not love, not even worry. Something colder. Something resigned. When consciousness returned, it did so slowly, like surfacing from deep water. The world came back in fragments. A piercing white light, the rhythmic beeping of monitors, the weight of blankets over my legs. My throat felt raw, my mouth dry. I tried to move, but my limbs felt foreign, disconnected. Someone was speaking. Nurse, I thought. Then footsteps approached my bed, steady and familiar. Marcus. I kept my eyes half open, adjusting to the blur. He leaned over me, close enough that I could feel his breath warm against my cheek. For a brief moment I expected comfort. A whispered "I'm here." Or "You made it." Something a husband would say after nearly losing his wife. Instead, I heard a whisper so soft it almost blended with the beeping machines. A sentence that sliced through the fog and rooted itself in my chest like ice. "You weren't supposed to survive." My heartbeat spiked, sending the monitor into a frantic rhythm. Marcus straightened quickly, his expression smoothing into something neutral as the nurse returned. He stepped back, hands in his pockets, as though nothing had happened. As though he hadn't just torn the world in half with a sentence meant only for ears. He didn't expect to still be working. In that moment, clarity came with terrifying precision. I wasn't imagining it. He had whispered it deliberately, quietly, confidently. Because Marcus didn't expect me to wake up. Because whatever had been hiding behind his eyes that morning was no longer hidden. And as my vision cleared, as I finally met his gaze fully, I saw it without question. The flicker wasn't stress. It was disappointment. The room felt as if it were tilting, though I knew it was only my body battling its way back from anesthesia. Voices floated in and out like muffled echoes underwater. I could hear the wheels of a cart somewhere down the hall, a soft conversation between nurses, the steady beeping of my own heart reminding me that I was still here, still breathing, still alive. But those sounds seemed far away, secondary to the one sentence replaying over and over in my mind, each repetition colder than the last. You weren't supposed to survive. The words slithered through the haze, carrying a weight that pressed against my chest, stealing air from my lungs. My eyes fluttered, trying to force the room into clarity. At first, the fluorescent light above me fractured into swollen shapes, blurring everything into a colorless smear. But inch by inch, the fog began to lift, and the shapes sharpened. I could make out the rails of my bed, the 4 poles standing stiffly beside me, the curtain partially pulled around my section of the recovery room. And then I saw him. Marcus stood at the foot of the bed, staring at me with an expression that didn't match the relief I expected. There was no smile, no tension leaving his shoulders, no frantic rush to touch my hand or ask how I felt. He didn't look like a man grateful his wife had made it through a dangerous procedure. He looked startled, almost irritated. The memory of his whisper hit me again, sharp and unmistakable. Cold tremor moved through my body. The room's temperature hadn't changed, the blankets hadn't shifted, but I felt myself freezing, bit by bit, from the inside out. Had I imagined it? Could anesthesia cause hallucinations so vivid they felt real? The doctors had warned me about grogginess, confusion, even brief surreal thoughts. Maybe that was it. Maybe my mind was filling gaps with fears I didn't know I had. But then Marcus stepped closer. The nurse beside me was adjusting my smiling kindly, telling me I'd done well, that the surgery was over, that I was safe. She spoke with a warmth I clung to instinctively, like a rope thrown into deep water. But Marcus didn't wait for her to finish. He moved to my side and placed his hand on the rail. His fingers stiff, knuckles pale, grip too tight. "How are you feeling?" he asked. But it wasn't a question. It was a test. There was no softness in his tone, no tremor of worry, no relief echoing in the words. Instead, I heard something like calculation. My stomach twisted. I met his eyes, searching for the familiar warmth I'd convinced myself had always been there, buried beneath the responsibilities and stresses of marriage. Instead, I found something hollow. His gaze flicked over my face as if assessing damage, as if cataloging the parts of me that were still functioning. That look stole whatever hope I had left that the whisper was a dream. A sharp panic rose inside me, but my body was too weak to respond. My fingers didn't even twitch beneath the blanket. My tongue felt heavy, thick, glued to the roof of my mouth. I wanted to ask him what he meant. I wanted to ask if I'd misunderstood. I wanted to ask why his eyes held disappointment instead of relief. But the words wouldn't come. The nurse finished adjusting the line and gently touched my shoulder, oblivious to the silent exchange happening inches away. She told me she'd return in a few minutes and walked off, leaving me with the man who had just let his truth slip out in a whisper. He believed I wouldn't survive long enough to hear. Marcus leaned closer again, not as close as before, but enough for me to see every detail of his expression. The faint tightening of his jaw. The faint curve at the corner of his lips that wasn't quite a smile. The slight furrow between his brows that looked less like concern and more like irritation at an obstacle revived instead of removed. "Rest," he said quietly. But it wasn't comfort. It was instruction. Command to stay silent, to stay weak, to stay unaware. I closed my eyes, but not because I was tired. I closed them because I didn't want him to see that I knew, that I remembered, that I was already piecing together the truth he never intended for me to live long enough to confront. The whisper hadn't been anesthesia-induced imagination. It had been a confession. For the first time since waking up, I let my mind drift backward, not because I wanted to revisit the past but because something inside me insisted, an inner voice finally breaking free after years of being quieted. The whisper Marcus had delivered at my bedside cracked something open. And once the crack appeared, memories began spilling through it in ways I could no longer ignore or reinterpret as love. In the beginning, Marcus had seemed unwaveringly attentive. We met in our late 20s at a mutual friend's dinner party, where he'd pulled out my chair and remembered the exact way I took my coffee after hearing it once. He'd shown up at my office the next week with that same coffee order, smiling as if it were a grand romantic gesture. I remembered thinking that he listened better than anyone I'd ever dated. I mistook attention for affection. Now those moments replayed differently. I could see how quickly that attentiveness became monitoring. The texts asking where I was, who I was with. The way he casually mentioned checking my location, just to make sure you got home safe. I thought it was sweet, protective. I didn't recognize the possessiveness threaded through it. And the financial control. Back then it had looked like support. He'd insisted after we married that he'd take over all the stressful stuff like bills, budgeting, investments. He told me he wanted me to focus on my career and passions, that he didn't want me drowning in paperwork the way his mother used to. I believed him. I handed over passwords, statements, decisions. He told me I was lucky, that he was just trying to take care of me. Times when I asked questions, why he transferred money between accounts so often, why he suddenly wanted us on a strict budget even though nothing had changed. He'd smile, stroke my cheek, and reassure me that he had it under control. I let myself be soothed. I mistook control for competence. There were other memories too. Smaller ones, subtle enough that they wove themselves into normalcy before I ever noticed they were there. The way he wrinkled his nose whenever I mentioned seeing my sisters, calling them too dramatic and bad influences. How he insisted on driving me everywhere, because parking is stressful for you. How he discouraged nights out with coworkers, saying he didn't want me around people who didn't value me the way he did. I had assumed his concern came from a place of love, that he simply preferred quiet nights curled on the couch with me. But as the medicine haze faded and reality sharpened, those memories rearranged themselves into a truth I didn't want to face. Isolation disguised as intimacy. Control disguised as care. Possession disguised as devotion. One memory surfaced more clearly than the others. Our third anniversary. We had gone to a small cabin 3 hours from home. I remembered being overwhelmed with a project at work and texting my best friend to vent about it. Marcus had caught a glimpse of my phone and asked to read the message, claiming he felt left out when I confided in others. I'd felt guilty, handed it over, apologized. He'd comforted me, said he understood, but also gently pointed out that marriage means choosing each other first. At the time, I'd cried from feeling deeply understood. Now, lying in a recovery bed with his whisper lodged like ice in my chest, I understood something else. That moment wasn't about closeness. It was the quiet closing of a door, a narrowing of my world, a shift in ownership he made look like connection. And the more memories rose, the more I felt my stomach knot. Times he'd said he didn't like certain friends of mine. Times he'd dismissed promotions I wanted to pursue because he didn't think I'd be happy in a stressful role. Times he'd signed documents for us, saying it was easier if he handled it. Times he'd encouraged me to let him manage my health insurance, my retirement funds, my life insurance policy. Things I now wished I had watched more closely. But the memory that hit me hardest came suddenly, uninvited. 6 months ago. The night I first told Marcus the doctor had found something during a routine exam. The way he hugged me, almost too tightly. His hand rubbing my back in slow, controlled motions. He had whispered, "Whatever happens, I'll take care of everything," and I remembered thinking it was romantic. Now I saw it differently. Not a promise. Plan. The pieces were rearranging faster now, clicking into place with a sickening clarity. The red flags I had ignored formed a timeline. The patterns I had softened in my mind took on their true shape. My marriage had never been what I thought it was. It had been a cage built slowly. So slowly I hadn't noticed when the door closed behind me. And the surgery I'd trusted him to walk me through. It was never meant to bring me home. The first night after surgery settled over the hospital like a heavy blanket. Dim hall lights, soft footsteps, the muted hum of machines that never fully sleep. I drifted in and out, the anesthesia still lingering at the edges of my mind, but not enough to blur the whisper I kept hearing in my head. Every time I closed my eyes, the memory replayed in different shades of dread. You weren't supposed to survive. I tried to steady my breathing to pretend I was resting because I sensed that showing too much awareness might be dangerous. I didn't trust Marcus. Not anymore. Sometime after midnight, the curtain around my bed shifted. A faint beam of light came through the gap as someone entered. I recognized the soft shuffle of nursing shoes on linoleum. When she stepped closer, I saw her clearly. An older nurse, her dark hair pulled back loosely, deep shadows under her eyes from years of overnight shifts. There was something immediately calming about her presence, something steady. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen more than she spoke about. She checked my vitals, her touch gentle, her face unreadable. Then she glanced toward the chair in the corner, empty. Marcus wasn't there. He had left earlier after attempting to mask his irritation behind a strained smile. He told me he needed rest, that he'd be back early. But the way he looked at me before walking out had kept my muscles tense even after he was gone, as if his absence was only a temporary pause in a threat I couldn't yet define. The nurse took a step closer to my bed. "You're awake," she said softly, adjusting my blanket. It wasn't a question. She could tell. I nodded slowly, my mouth too dry for words. "Your husband left for the night," she continued, her tone neutral. "Said he'd return in the morning." There was a slight pause, so slight I almost missed it. Something about the way she said husband made my skin prickle. A hint of something beneath her professionalism. She glanced toward the doorway, as if making sure we were alone. Then her eyes returned to mine, warmer now, almost concerned. "You had a difficult procedure," she murmured. "Your numbers dipped lower than we expected during surgery. You gave us a bit of a scare." Her voice carried a strange weight, as though there was more she could say but chose not to. Something about it made my chest tighten. I swallowed painfully. Did he say anything to you?" The words came out weak, but she heard them. She hesitated. Not long, just long enough to confirm she was choosing her response carefully. "He seemed anxious," she said quietly. Her eyes didn't leave mine. More anxious than most spouses I've seen in similar situations. A chill crept up my spine. She went on, pretending to busy herself with the 4-pump. "He kept asking how long it would take before we'd know if you were stable. Asked 3 different nurses the same question." He paused again. "He didn't sit much. Mostly paced." I felt my fingers twitch beneath the blankets. She wasn't accusing him. She wasn't implying anything outright. But the message hung between us like faint smoke, visible only if you paid attention. "He wasn't here when you woke up," she added softly. "Most loved ones stay until they're sure the patient opens their eyes." Most loved ones. The implication stirred something raw inside me. I stared at her, trying to read her expression. She didn't look suspicious or dramatic. She looked like someone who had seen things go wrong in ways people never talked about. Someone who knew when something wasn't right. Before I could respond, she lowered her voice further. "If you need anything at all, you press that call button. Don't hesitate." She held my gaze in a way that made it clear she wasn't being procedural. She was warning me without saying the words out loud. My heart thudded, slow but heavy. "Is there something I should be worried about?" I whispered, testing the ground. Her eyes softened, but she didn't answer directly. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "stress brings out behaviors in family members that are unusual." Another pause. "And sometimes patients wake up and realize things they didn't see before." My throat tightened. She didn't know what Marcus had whispered. She didn't know how deeply those words had carved themselves into me. But she sensed something. She saw something. She rested a hand lightly on my arm. "Just take care of yourself tonight," she murmured. "You're safe here." Safe here. The phrase hit me harder than I expected. Safe here implied unsafe somewhere else. Unsafe with someone else. After she left, the room felt different. The shadows seemed more watchful, the silence more alert. I lay there staring at the ceiling, her words echoing in my mind along with Marcus's whisper. For the first time, I wondered whether the nurse had seen something long before I woke up, something she couldn't say but couldn't ignore. And that terrified me more than the surgery ever had. Morning light seeped through the blinds in thin, pale stripes, settling across my blanket and the metal railing of my bed. I had barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, the whisper returned, and with it came flashes of moments I had once dismissed as stress or exhaustion. Now they felt like warnings I had ignored. The nurse from the night shift had left something lingering in the room, an unspoken nudge, a quiet alertness, and by the time the day shift staff arrived, a new determination had settled in my chest. I needed answers. When my nurse came in to check my vitals, I asked to review my medical chart. I tried to sound casual, even curious, but my voice trembled slightly. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the blood pressure cuff as if she wasn't sure whether she should respond. Patients rarely asked for their own charts, at least not the day after surgery. But after a moment, she nodded politely, telling me she'd be back after speaking to the charge nurse. While I waited, I stared at the door, half expecting Marcus to walk through it. The thought made my pulse spike. I didn't want him here, not yet. Not until I understood what had actually happened to me. The nurse returned with a tablet and a printed section of my patient file clipped to a small board. "You can review these," she said gently. "Some notes are still updating, but this is most of what you signed before the procedure." Her tone held a subtle emphasis on the word signed. My heartbeat thudded in my ears as I lifted the papers. I recognized some portions: standard surgical risks, potential complications, anesthesia disclosures. But as I flipped through the pages, cold dread crept up my spine. Several forms were missing entirely. Sections that should have been initialed were blank. And the final consent page, the one with my signature, stopped my breath. The handwriting looked like mine at a glance, but only if someone didn't know me. The loops were off, the slant too sharp. The signature looked practiced. "Is something wrong?" the nurse asked quietly. I stared at the page longer than I should have. "This isn't my signature," I whispered. She didn't react outwardly. No widening eyes, no gasp. Just a slow shift, her gaze dropping to the paper, then back up to my face. "I'll get the surgeon," she said. Her voice was steady, too steady, like she was holding back more questions. When she left, I lay frozen, gripping the board with numb fingers. I remembered signing one form, days ago, during a pre-op appointment. But it was short. Nothing like this stack, half of which I had never seen before. My stomach twisted. The faint antiseptic smell of the room suddenly made me feel nauseated. Minutes later, the surgeon arrived. His expression professional but guarded. He stood at the foot of the bed, hands clasped together, as if preparing to guide me through a difficult conversation. "Your nurse said you had questions about the consent documents." "I don't recognize most of these," I said. "And that signature isn't mine." He cleared his throat softly. "The morning of your procedure, we asked you to sign updated forms. It's possible you don't remember due to the preoperative sedative." "I wasn't given anything yet when we arrived," I cut in. My voice was thin, but I forced steadiness. "I remember everything before they rolled me away." His eyes flicked downward. He hesitated. "Well, sometimes patients mix up time frames. Pre-surgery can be stressful." He was lying. Or at least, dancing around something he didn't want to say outright. I turned the papers toward him. "Why is the anesthesia consent different from the one I signed last week? Why does it mention complications I was never told about? And why, My voice cracked despite my effort. Was I listed as high risk when no one told me anything about that? The silence that followed was heavier than his earlier reassurances. The surgeon shifted his weight. His polished confidence slipped almost imperceptibly. "The chart indicates your husband signed on your behalf for some sections," he finally said. "He said you were too anxious to complete them, and since he had power of attorney." I stared at him, stunned. "He doesn't have power of attorney." The surgeon blinked once, slowly. "He presented paperwork." Presented paperwork. My breath stilled. My mouth went dry. A deep, cold weight settled in my chest, pressing down until I felt hollow. "I'd like to see that," I said quietly. He hesitated again, a long pause filled with things he did not want to say. "The document isn't included in this packet. I'll have to request it from administrative records." His voice cracked just slightly on administrative. We both knew what that meant. It wasn't there. Or it shouldn't be. A shiver moved through me as realization sank in, not just about the documents, but about the entire morning of the surgery. The drink Marcus handed me. The drive I barely remembered. The way he answered every question at check-in before the nurses could even look at me. There were no alarms sounding in the room. No chaos. No shouting. But suddenly everything inside me was sirens. Silent ones. The kind that tell you danger has been here much longer than you ever understood. Marcus arrived the next morning just after sunrise, the light behind him turning his silhouette into a long, stretched shadow across the floor. I pretended to sleep at first, my breathing steady, my eyes barely open. Something in me needed to observe him before he realized I was awake. I wanted to see who he was when he wasn't performing for nurses or doctors. When he thought I wasn't watching. It took only seconds for the truth to reveal itself. His posture relaxed the moment he thought I was unconscious. His shoulders lowered, not in relief but in something that looked disturbingly close to irritation. He stood at the foot of the bed, staring at me with a stillness that made my skin tighten. Then his mouth pressed into a thin line, almost a frown, before he forced it upward into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He stepped closer and cleared his throat, shifting quickly into the version of himself the world saw. The attentive husband, the doting spouse who never left my side. "Morning, sweetheart," he said. His voice sweetened but sharp at the edges. "You're looking better already." I opened my eyes fully, letting him see that I was awake. He smiled wider, too wide, as though stretching the expression far enough might hide what lurked beneath. He leaned down and kissed my forehead, the gesture stiff and calculated. "You're really pulling through," he said. I honestly didn't expect such a quick turnaround. I felt the words like ice along my spine. The whisper from the first night replayed in the back of my mind. "You weren't supposed to survive." Now, hearing him speak in the open, I could sense the tightness behind his tone, the frustration buried beneath the surface. He took the chair beside my bed and sat down, crossing one leg over the other. "I talked to the insurance company yesterday," he continued casually, as though discussing the weather. "They're adjusting some of our paperwork due to your hospitalization. Standard stuff." He paused, glancing sideways at me. "They wanted a few forms signed. Shouldn't take long. I brought them with me." A hollow ache settled in my stomach. "Insurance forms?" asked, keeping my voice soft. "Just routine," he said quickly. "Life insurance, disability coverage, some updates. You know how these companies get complicated for no reason." But his foot tapped slightly. His fingers drummed restlessly on the arm of the chair. The impatience leaked out of him in small movements he couldn't seem to contain. "When do you think you'll be able to sign?" he asked, too bright, too eager. "I should probably wait until I'm fully alert," I murmured, watching his reaction carefully. His smile faltered for half a second. "Well, sure, but it's nothing difficult. And the sooner we get things processed, the better." Processed. The word clung to the air like smoke. He reached into his bag and pulled out a neat stack of papers clipped together. He kept them angled toward himself, only showing me the top corner. The gesture wasn't protective, it was concealing. I could tell he didn't want me reading yet. He wanted me signing. "You've always trusted me with this stuff," he said. His tone light but laced with something else. Warning, expectation, pressure. "Let's just handle it, okay? Less for you to worry about. Less for me to worry about." Familiar line. One he'd used with bills, accounts, investments, decisions. A line I once thought was love. Now it tasted like manipulation. I stretched my fingers, forcing myself to look groggy. "Maybe tomorrow," I whispered. "I'm still tired." This time the mask slipped. Barely but unmistakably. His jaw clenched. His nostrils flared in the smallest, quickest motion. He sat back slightly, gripping the papers harder, the edges crinkling under his fingertips. The smile he attempted to put back on his face was strained, almost painful. "Tomorrow," he repeated. "Right. Of course." But his tone was flat, displeased, almost angry. He stared at me longer than necessary, studying my face, perhaps wondering if I was resisting for a reason, perhaps wondering how much I knew. My heart thudded so loudly I feared he could hear it. He finally stood, forcing cheer into his voice. "I'll bring them back in the morning. You'll feel better then. Stronger. Clear-minded." The subtext was unmistakable. "Sign them tomorrow. Or else." As he left the room, the air felt lighter. Not because I was safe, but because his presence had been a weight pressing against every part of me. I watched the door close behind him, his forced smile lingering in the air long after he was gone. He was too eager, too insistent, too hopeful for an outcome that made no sense for someone who loved me. And now I understood why the nurse the night before had spoken so carefully, why she'd watched him with narrowed eyes. She had sensed it too, the crack in his mask, the sharp edge beneath the charm. He was waiting, not for my recovery, but for my cooperation. For the moment I signed something that would benefit him far more than it would ever protect me. And every passing day, his patience was unraveling. Throughout the day, I tried to stay present, listening to the nurses, answering questions, pretending to rest. But my mind kept drifting back to the night before surgery, a night I had pushed aside in my memory because it felt ordinary, unremarkable. Now, under the weight of everything I'd learned, those blurred fragments began to resurface, sharper and heavier than before. It started with the drink. I remembered coming home from my final pre-op appointment, feeling drained from the tests and instructions. Marcus was in the kitchen when I walked in, already pouring something into a glass. He turned to me with a smile that felt brighter than usual, too bright, and handed me the drink before I could set down my bag. "You need to relax," he'd said. "Doctor's orders, right? Rest, hydrate, stay calm." The liquid had been cold and sweet, a mix of something citrus with an aftertaste I couldn't quite identify. I remembered blinking at the glass, thinking the flavor was strange but not unpleasant. I remembered him watching me as I drank it, his eyes following every sip. At the time I assumed he was worried. Now I wasn't so sure. After dinner, though I barely remembered eating, he brought out a stack of papers from the office. He placed them on the table with a controlled calmness that, in hindsight, wasn't calm at all. It was forced, too deliberate. "These are just some forms the hospital emailed," he said. "Insurance updates, procedural consents, all administrative stuff." I remembered frowning. "I already signed everything last week." "They sent new ones," he insisted quickly. "It's routine for high-risk procedures." "High risk?" Dask startled. "The doctor said it was straightforward." There had been a pause. His smile tightened, thin around the edges. "He meant straightforward for them," he said. "But they always classify abdominal surgeries as high risk. Don't worry about it. Just sign so they don't delay anything tomorrow." I remembered the way my stomach twisted at the word high risk. I remembered reaching for the papers and scanning the first page. The text swam a little, my head suddenly heavy, my eyes struggling to focus. I thought I was tired. I thought the long day was catching up with me. Marcus tapped the signature line. "Here," he urged, his tone soft but tense. "It's just your standard consent." I studied the page again. The words wouldn't stay still. "I don't feel right," I'd whispered. "Something feels off." He exhaled sharply, not loud but with an edge of irritation. "You're anxious," he said. "You always overthink things like this. Trust me. I already reviewed everything." That sentence echoed now in my mind like a warning I had missed. Trust me. I remembered how my hand trembled as I held the pen. The tip hovered over the signature line, but a strange heaviness suddenly settled over me, pulling at my eyelids, fogging my thoughts. "Did you put something in that drink?" I'd half-joked, trying to laugh off the dizziness building in my chest. His eyes flicked up sharply, too sharply. For a moment he didn't smile. He didn't laugh. He didn't tease me back. Then he chuckled, but it was delayed, awkward. "It's just a vitamin mix," he said. "You need electrolytes. Stop being paranoid." Paranoid. A word he used often. A word that had once made me shrink and apologize. Now it felt like a label he relied on when he needed to shut down my instincts. At some point the papers moved closer. His hand guided mine. I remembered blinking slowly, the room dimming at the edges. My signature wavered, sloppy and uneven. I couldn't recall finishing all the pages. I couldn't recall reading anything else. I only remembered the weight of fatigue pulling me under, the sound of his voice somewhere in the background, saying something I couldn't process. The next memory was waking up on the couch hours later, with him draping a blanket over me. His expression unreadable. "You needed rest," he said. "Big day tomorrow." But now, lying in the stark brightness of the hospital room, every detail rearranged itself into a truth I hadn't been willing to see. The drink that made me dizzy, the papers he pushed toward me, the sharpness in his voice when I hesitated, the urgency he tried to disguise as care, and the most horrifying realization of all. I couldn't remember how many documents I had signed, or what they said, or if my signature had ever truly been my own. The night before surgery was no longer a blur of stress. It was a blueprint, set up, a carefully choreographed sequence of moments meant to push me into compliance. And the more I pieced it together, the more certain I became that Marcus hadn't simply been preparing me for surgery. He had been preparing for an outcome he thought the surgery would guarantee. By the second full day after the surgery, the hospital required what they called a standard post-operative psychosocial evaluation. Every major procedure triggered one, especially when complications occurred. I didn't know then whether my case had technically been labeled a complication, but the tremor in the surgeon's voice and the missing consent forms told me enough. Someone in the chain had flagged something unusual. The woman who entered my room that afternoon introduced herself as Dana, a hospital social worker. She was in her late 40s, with short hair and a soft, even tone that felt deliberately calming. She carried a tablet, a binder, and the kind of practiced empathy you only develop after years of hearing stories that do not match the paperwork handed to you. "I'm here for your post-op assessment," she said gently. "We just want to check on how you're recovering emotionally and see if you have any support at home." Support at home. The phrase made the back of my throat tighten. She pulled up a chair and sat close to my bedside. Her presence eased something in me, something that had been knotted since the moment I opened my eyes in recovery. She asked routine questions about pain levels, sleep quality, physical discomfort. But then she shifted, almost imperceptibly, into territory that felt less medical and more investigative. "Have you been feeling safe?" she asked softly. My breath caught. I hesitated, searching for a safe answer. Before I could speak, the door swung open. Marcus walked in briskly, carrying a paper cup of coffee and wearing the same too-bright smile he'd worn every morning since the surgery. He stopped when he saw Dana, and the smile tightened. "Oh," he said. "Didn't know we had company." Dana stood politely. I'm doing a required evaluation with your wife. She doesn't need that, he said quickly, moving to stand beside my bed. She's doing fine. Right, sweetheart. He didn't touch me, but his presence felt like a hand clamping over my voice. Dana's expression didn't change, but her posture shifted, subtle, firm. These assessments are routine and confidential. I'll just need a few minutes alone with her. A quiet tension filled the room. Marcus smiled again, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Like I said, she doesn't need it. She does, Dana replied gently but firmly. It's hospital policy. For a moment, it looked like he might argue, but instead he pressed the coffee cup into my hand, leaned close and murmured, "I'll be right outside." He didn't say it like reassurance. He said it like a warning. When the door closed, Dana waited a few breaths. Waiting, I realized, to ensure he was truly gone. Then she turned back to me. "Has anything happened during your stay that made you uncomfortable?" she asked. Uncomfortable wasn't the right word. Terrified was closer. But fear made the truth feel dangerous, like saying it aloud might collapse the thin barrier keeping me safe. Still, I heard myself whisper, "My husband, he said something to me. The first night. Something strange." "What did he say?" I looked at the door, then at her. "He said I wasn't supposed to survive." Dana's face didn't show shock, but something shifted, a heaviness settling behind her eyes. She tapped something on her tablet. "And before surgery?" she asked, still calm. "Anything unusual there?" Fragments of the drink he gave me. Papers. The dizziness. The signature that wasn't mine. They all crowded my throat, making it difficult to swallow. "I think he had me sign things I didn't understand," I managed. "Maybe things I didn't even agree to." Dana's voice softened even further. "Thank you for telling me." She stood, placing a reassuring hand on the blanket near my leg. "I'm going to speak with the medical team. I won't mention anything to him. But I need you to stay calm and press your call button if he comes in and you feel unsafe. Do you understand?" Unsafe. She'd said it out loud, the word I had been too afraid to give shape to. She stepped out into the hallway. And that's when everything shifted. Marcus was waiting just outside. I couldn't see him, but I heard the change in his voice. Sharp, harsh, cracking through the quiet corridor. "What did you ask her?" he demanded. "What's going on?" Dana's reply was low, steady, but I couldn't hear the words. Marcus's voice lifted again, cutting through the hallway like a blade. "She doesn't need a social worker. She has me. I said she's fine." The sudden slam of a chair against the wall made my heart hammer. Nurses rushed past my door. A male voice, a guard maybe, spoke firmly, telling Marcus to lower his voice, to step back, to calm himself. Seconds later, everything fell silent except for the pounding of my pulse. Then the door opened. A security officer stepped inside, followed by Dana. "You'll have limited visitors for now," Dana said gently. "For your safety." For the first time since waking from surgery, the world felt like it made sense. Not safe, not steady, but no longer uncertain. Someone else saw it. Someone else believed me. And Marcus's reaction told me the truth more clearly than any whisper ever could. He wasn't losing patience. He was losing control. When night returned and the hallway quieted again, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment from the social worker's visit to Marcus's outburst. My body was still weak, but my mind, foggy and slow only hours earlier, felt sharp, fueled by something colder than fear. I realized that if I wanted to survive whatever Marcus had planned, I needed to understand the full extent of what he'd set in motion. I needed to know what he was doing behind my back, what steps he had taken in the months leading up to the surgery. The answers, I suspected, were buried in places I had been trained not to look. For years, Marcus had handled everything financial. Bills, investments, insurance, savings. Things I thought were simply him being responsible. He always phrased it as taking stress off my plate, as protecting us from mistakes I might make because I wasn't detail-oriented. That was his phrase, repeated enough times that I eventually believed it. But now, lying in a hospital bed with a security guard posted discreetly near my door, I wondered what details he hadn't wanted me to see. My phone was on the small table beside me. A nurse had placed it there hours earlier. I reached for it, wincing at the pull in my abdomen. The screen lit up. Battery low but enough. My fingers trembled as I opened our joint banking app. The moment the dashboard loaded, my pulse spiked. The balance was wrong. Much lower than I remembered. Not catastrophically low, but off enough to make my stomach twist. I clicked through the transactions, scrolling back through the last few months. Transfers. Large ones. Money moved between accounts I didn't know existed. Amounts shifting every few weeks for reasons that were never explained to me. There were credit card charges I didn't recognize. Electronics, jewelry, hotel bookings. Some charges were in cities I hadn't visited. Others belonged to accounts I had never authorized. I tried to convince myself they were mistakes. Maybe fraudulent charges. But the more I scrolled, the more a pattern emerged. Regular, intentional, calculated. Then I found something that made my breath leave my body. A payment to an insurance company. One we hadn't used since we first got married. A policy we canceled years ago when we switched providers. At least I thought we had canceled it. The description beside the charge was unmistakable. Life insurance premium. A very large premium. My chest tightened. I clicked the payment history. There it was. Regular monthly payments for almost a year. All hidden among other transactions he must have known I wouldn't question. My blood ran cold when I saw the notation next to the policy number. Increased coverage. Doubled. My hands shook so violently I had to grip the phone to keep it from falling. He had secretly increased my life insurance. Behind my back. Without a single conversation. Without my consent. I clicked the information link. The details loaded slowly, as if the universe was taking its time before delivering the final blow. The beneficiary was listed in bold letters. Marcus. No secondary beneficiary. No contingencies. Just him. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt sealed shut. My pulse thrummed behind my eyes. I remembered the drink he gave me the night before surgery. The papers I'd signed while dizzy and disoriented. The way he hovered, guiding my hand. The insurance updates he kept pushing in the hospital. He had been preparing for a payout. I moved to our savings account next. More transfers. More unexplained withdrawals. A series of payments to an account ending in numbers I didn't recognize. Personal account. Not joint. Money siphoned away piece by piece. Then came the credit score page. I clicked it reluctantly, bracing myself. A lot of it. Credit cards maxed out. A loan I never signed for. A second loan taken out 3 months ago. My name attached, my signature forged. I felt dizzy, the room beginning to tilt. A static buzz filling my ears. This wasn't mishandling. This wasn't irresponsibility. This was deliberate. Strategic. The kind of financial restructuring someone might do if they expected to be alone soon. With someone else's assets. My assets. I stared at the screen, a horrible question forming. One I had been running from since the recovery room. How long had he been planning this? My mind sifted through the past year. His sudden interest in managing all accounts. His insistence that I stop checking our statements, the pressure to let him streamline everything. The way he encouraged me to cut back on work, saying we were financially secure enough for me to relax more. That last part hit hardest. He didn't want me distracted. He wanted me uninvolved. He wanted me blind. The truth settled in my chest with suffocating heaviness. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This wasn't panic. This wasn't a split-second terrible decision. It was preparation. Months of it. Deliberate, hidden, methodical. And I had almost died to make the final piece fall into place. I locked my phone with shaking hands and stared at the ceiling, breathing through the icy realization crawling beneath my skin. Marcus hadn't planned for recovery. He had planned for aftermath. The next morning arrived with an uneasy stillness, the kind that settles when the world is holding its breath. Nurses checked on me, The surgeon made a brief appearance, and the social worker stopped by with a polite but pointed reminder that my visitor restrictions were still in place. Marcus hadn't shown up yet, and part of me knew exactly why. Security had made it clear he needed to calm down before returning. Still, I felt a knot tightening inside me, a silent countdown ticking somewhere in the background. A nurse came in to adjust my four, and as she moved around the room, she paused and looked at the bedside table. "Are these your husband's keys?" she asked. My eyes snapped to the table. There they were, a familiar ring holding his car key fob, his house key, and a small brass key I had never seen before. He must have left them behind during his outburst. The nurse placed them in my hand gently. "We can hold on to them in the nurse's station for safety if you'd prefer." But an idea sparked quickly, flashing through my chest like electricity. "No," I whispered. "I'll keep them." Once she left, I stared at the keys, my mind racing. Marcus was meticulous. He never lost his keys. Never misplaced anything. But seeing them now, I realized something about the fob, something that stirred an old memory. Years ago, he'd had issues with his main phone overheating, so he bought a backup, an older model he claimed was just for emergencies or travel. I never questioned it after he said he got rid of it. But now, holding his keys, I saw the small rectangular imprint of a pocket-sized device he kept on the same ring. My hands trembled as I slipped my fingers along the seam of the fob. It wasn't just a fob. It was a hidden compartment, one I had never noticed before because he never let me handle it. I pressed lightly, and the side snapped open with a tiny click. An old phone slid out. My breath hitched sharply. The room tilted for a moment. I stared at the phone. Black, worn at the edges, the kind of backup device someone uses for things they don't want easily traced. I powered it on with a shaking thumb. It lit up immediately. No password. A chill spread through me as the home screen loaded. Simple layout, few apps, almost nothing personal except for a single messaging app tucked neatly into a corner. My heart pounded as I opened it. The conversations were sparse, but the last thread, labeled only with an initial L, stole the air from my lungs. The most recent message was from 3 days ago. "Are you sure everything is arranged?" Marcus's reply appeared below it, casual and confident. "She won't make it through the surgery. Everything's in place." My hand flew to my mouth. Could barely breathe. The room seemed to close in around me as I scrolled upward. "I hate waiting," Elle had written. "We'll be free soon," Marcus answered. Free. The word sliced through me. My heart hammered so loudly I could barely hear anything else. I kept scrolling, unable to stop even as the dread deepened with every line. "She's signing the documents tonight. She's tired enough that she won't question it. You're sure they'll take her?" Last. "They always accept medical emergencies. And the insurance payout will come quickly." Insurance payout. My stomach twisted violently. Then came a message that made my blood turn to ice. "What if she wakes up?" Marcus's response was immediate. "She won't." I sat frozen, unable to blink, unable to think. The next messages were from weeks earlier. Plans to meet, small talk, hotel reservations, gentle assurances. Complaints about my slow healing after an earlier procedure I barely remembered. Even messages about my schedule, about when I'd be alone, about how stressed he was pretending to be. And then, a single message from Elle that shattered whatever pieces of denial still clung to me. "I can't wait for us to start over once she's gone." The device slipped from my hand and landed softly on the blanket. Start over. Plans. Insurance. Hotel rooms. My surgery. Every doubt I had tried to dismiss had been real. Every instinct I'd buried under trust was screaming at me now. The phone, the messages, they weren't ambiguous. They weren't misunderstandings. They were evidence of intent. Evidence of betrayal so deep I felt it in my bones. Marcus hadn't just been hiding money. He had been hiding a life. With another woman. A future he expected to begin after my death. The nurse entered quietly to check my chart, but she stopped when she saw my face. "Are you okay?" For the first time since waking up in recovery, I didn't hesitate. "No," I whispered. "I'm not." 'Cause now I had proof. He hadn't planned for my recovery. He had planned for my absence. The hospital grew quiet as night settled in. The soft glow from the hallway spilled into my room, stretching across the floor like a thin blade of light. My body still ached from surgery, but the deeper wound, the one carved by the messages on Marcus's old phone, throbbed far more painfully. I kept the device hidden beneath my blanket, its screen turned off, its weight feeling heavier than any piece of evidence should. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his words again, saw the casual cruelty of them, saw the future he had already planned without me in it. I knew he'd come. The social worker had warned me he might try, even with restrictions. Men like Marcus didn't handle losing control gracefully. They pushed, they pressed, they found cracks and slipped through them. The guard station down the hall reduced the danger, but it did not remove it. It was late, past the hour when visitors were supposed to be gone, when I heard footsteps outside my door. Low, measured, familiar. The handle turned gently, as if whoever was entering wanted to pretend the intrusion was accidental. I closed my eyes and let my breathing deepen into something that looked like sleep. The door opened a few inches, and more. Then Marcus slipped inside, silent as a shadow. His steps were soft but urgent. He moved to the side of my bed and stood there, staring at me. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and the cologne he always wore, a scent that once made me feel safe and now turned my stomach. Waited. He leaned closer, hovering over me. I felt his breath near my cheek, warm and slow. He whispered my name, testing to see if I would stir. When I didn't, he exhaled, relieved, almost satisfied. That was enough. I opened my eyes. Marcus jerked backwards, startled. The mask he had prepared, some version of doting concern or marital devotion, fell apart instantly. His eyes widened, flashes of annoyance, fear and calculation flickering through them so quickly they almost blurred together. "You scared me," he said with a strained laugh. "Didn't know you were awake." His voice wavered. He was unsettled. "But I've been awake for a while," I said quietly. He blinked, recovering quickly. "I just came to check on you. You know they wouldn't let me in earlier. I wanted to make sure you were okay." The lie slid out effortlessly, but it no longer had anywhere to land. "I know," I said. "I know what you wanted." His posture stiffened. "What's that supposed to mean?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. I simply reached under the blanket, pulled out the old phone, and held it in my lap where he could see it. The color drained from his face. For the first time I saw the real Marcus. Not the charming, gentle partner he had spent years pretending to be, but the man beneath the performance. A man whose secrets had been unearthed. "Where did you get that?" he asked, his voice dropping into something low and dangerous. "You left your keys," I said. "The phone was with them." He swore under his breath. He took a step forward, but I didn't flinch. Instead, I turned the screen toward him and tapped on the message thread labeled L. He froze. "I know about her," I said. "I know about the insurance, the forged signatures, plan, all of it." A muscle in his jaw twitched violently. His hands curled at his sides, shaking. He tried to form words, but they came out too quickly, as if he couldn't decide which lie to lead with. "You don't know what you're talking about. You're confused. Don't," I interrupted softly. That single word silenced him. Rage flickered in his eyes, bright and sharp. He wasn't used to being spoken to like that. Not by me. "You were supposed to die," I continued, my voice steady. "That's what you told her. That's what you told me, even if you thought I couldn't hear you." His breathing changed, shorter, heavier. Panic edged closer to rage. He took another step toward me, and for the first time I saw something predatory in the way he moved. "Give me the phone," he said quietly. "No." He lunged. Before he could get close, alarms erupted in the hallway. A nurse appeared in the doorway, followed by the security guard who had been posted nearby. Marcus stopped instantly, his hand still half reaching toward me. His face twisted with fury and desperation. It was the expression of a man who realized the walls were closing in. "Sir, you need to step away from the patient," the guard said firmly. Marcus swallowed hard, chest heaving. His eyes stayed locked on me, dark, unblinking, burning with a mix of hatred and disbelief. For a moment, I wondered if he was deciding whether to run or finish what he started. But he stepped back. The guard took his arm. Nurses surrounded my bed, their voices overlapping in calm, practiced tones. Marcus pulled against the guard only once, his mask fully shattered now. "You ruined everything," he hissed at me. "No," I whispered back. "You did." He was escorted out, his footsteps echoing down the corridor until they disappeared. The room fell quiet again, but the air felt lighter, as if something toxic had finally been forced out. I sank back into the pillow, breath trembling, heart pounding. The confrontation was over. But the danger was not. The minutes after Marcus was escorted out of my room felt surreal, like the world had tilted slightly off its axis and hadn't yet settled. Nurses moved around me with brisk purpose, checking monitors, adjusting my bed, asking measured questions meant to gauge both my physical state and my panic level. But beneath their clinical professionalism, I sensed something else, an alertness, a silent parsing of everything they had just witnessed. The guard remained at the doorway, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the hall as if expecting Marcus to reappear. It wasn't until the charge nurse entered, stern-faced, silver-haired, radiating authority, that the staff quieted. "Let's get you secure," she said gently. Secure. A word rarely spoken to patients unless there was a reason for real fear. She introduced herself as Nurse Patel, the shift supervisor, and she moved with an efficiency that made me feel, for the first time in days, like someone was firmly on my side. She didn't treat me like an fragile patient. She treated me like someone in danger. She closed the door halfway and lowered her voice. "Your social worker filled us in on some concerns. What just happened confirms we need to take immediate steps." She said it with a weight that made my pulse spike. "What kind of steps?" "Yes. First, we're moving you to a different room. One he doesn't know about." The words hit me hard, relief mixed with the bitter sting of reality. I needed to be hidden. From my husband. Another nurse, Emily, quietly began unplugging my monitors, coiling wires with practiced swiftness. She gave me a small, sympathetic smile, the kind that held no pity, only understanding. I recognized her as the night shift nurse who had hinted, gently, that something was wrong. Now she wasn't hinting anymore. "We've got you," she said softly. Within minutes, I was being wheeled down the hall in a transport chair, blankets wrapped around me, my records tucked against my lap like a shield. The guard walked beside us. Nurse Patel led the way. We turned corners I'd never turned before, past doors labeled only with numbers instead of patient names, and stopped at a private room deeper inside the surgical wing. "We don't usually put recovering patients here," Patel said as she opened the door, "but it's monitored by internal staff only, and visitor access is controlled electronically." Controlled electronically. Meaning Marcus couldn't charm, argue, or force his way in. Inside, the room was dimmer, quieter, more enclosed. I should have felt confined, but instead, I exhaled for the first time since the confrontation. Once settled into the new bed, Patel placed a bright orange sticker on the chart outside my door. "No visitors without authorization." She added a code beneath it, something only staff could enter into the system. "Your husband has been removed from the premises," she said. He attempted to re-enter the surgical floor. Security escorted him off hospital grounds. He will not be allowed back in. A tremor of relief moved through me, shaky but real. "Will he try again?" I whispered. Patel hesitated. "Possibly. But he won't get past the lobby. Trust that." Her words steadied me, though the fear lingered in my bones. Moments later, the social worker, Dana, entered with two people, one in a blazer carrying a laptop, the other holding a stack of official-looking papers. They introduced themselves as part of the hospital's legal and risk management team. "We're opening a formal investigation," the woman in the blazer said. "Not only into the incident tonight, but into your medical documents, signatures, and reported concerns." My breath caught. "You believe me?" Dana stepped closer, her voice gentle. "We do. And what we've seen so far is enough to warrant immediate action." The team explained each step carefully. My chart was placed under restricted access, meaning no one outside essential staff could view it or alter it. All consent forms were being pulled and compared to archived signatures the hospital already had. Administrative records were being searched for any sign of a power of attorney document Marcus claimed to possess. Security logs were being preserved. Footage from the confrontation outside my room was already flagged for review. "We're also documenting your statement," the legal advisor said. "You can give it in parts. Whatever you're ready to share." As they spoke, the weight inside my chest shifted. It didn't disappear. Fear rarely does, but it found something solid to lean against. At one point, Emily returned with my medication and a cup of water. She lingered longer than required, her hand brushing mine in a brief, steadying gesture. "You're not alone in this," she murmured. "We see people at their worst in hospitals. But we also see people who won't let that stand." Her kindness nearly brought me to tears. After they left, the room felt heavy with exhaustion, but safer than anywhere I'd been in months. My monitors beeped softly beside me. A security guard sat outside the door, visible through the small window. And in my lap, the old phone remained, a quiet, damning truth that had sparked everything now unfolding. This wasn't just survival anymore. It was the beginning of something larger, something I never expected to face. The beginning of dismantling the life Marcus had built around deceiving me. And the first night I realized, I wasn't escaping alone. An entire team was helping me walk out. The next morning the hospital felt different. The usual sounds, the distant alarms, the rolling carts, the soft chatter of nurses, seemed muted under a layer of tension I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was because everyone who entered my room now did so with a careful seriousness, as though they were walking into a fragile situation. Or maybe it was because the investigation was no longer theoretical. It had begun to gather weight, moving from whispers and concerns into cold, documented fact. It started when the head of risk management entered my room carrying a thick folder. She introduced herself as Marin, a woman with a clipped tone and eyes sharp with purpose. She asked if I felt well enough to talk. I nodded, though my stomach was tight with dread. She pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down, flipping open the folder with a quiet finality. "We've completed the initial review of your records," she said. "And there are some findings you need to be aware of." Findings. The word made my breath catch. She turned the first page toward me. "This is the preoperative consent packet you supposedly signed the morning of your procedure." I looked at the forms. Several of them bore my signature, but they were sloppy, uneven, inconsistent. Not my usual handwriting. Not even close. Some signatures slanted left, others right, and a few were nearly illegible, as if written by someone imitating my style while under pressure. "These were not signed in your presence," Marin continued. "And they do not match your archived signatures in our system." My fingers curled into the blanket. "He signed them," I whispered. "We believe so," she said gently. "But it goes further." She lifted another document, my pre-op anesthesia form. It was marked high risk. Sedative sensitivity noted. I frowned. "I don't have a sedative sensitivity." "I know," she said. "But your blood work from the morning of surgery tells a different story." She handed me a printed lab report. My eyes scanned the lines until I found the highlighted section. Preoperative blood test. Sedative concentration. Elevated. Not consistent with administered doses. A chill shot through my body. "What does that mean?" "It means," Marin said slowly, "that someone gave you medication before you arrived at the hospital. A sedative not listed in your medical chart." My mind flashed back instantly. The drink. The dizziness. The blurred signatures. Marcus's too smooth smile. I swallowed hard. So I wasn't just tired. No, she said softly. Your pre-op levels were high enough that you were not fully competent to sign anything. And more importantly, the sedative could have interacted dangerously with the anesthesia you were given here. My stomach twisted. Could that have killed me? She didn't answer immediately. She folded her hands, lowered her voice and said, yes. The risk would have been significant. The room swayed slightly. I gripped the side rail until the metal dug into my palm. What about the surgery itself? Asked, my voice thin. Was there anything unusual? Marin hesitated, then pulled out another sheet. This one from the surgical team's internal review. Your chart flagged complications during the procedure, she said. Your blood pressure dropped abruptly. Your oxygen levels fell. It was momentarily critical. I felt my heart hammer. So I almost died. You came very close, she said. The surgeon stabilized you quickly, but the suddenness of the decline was unusual. I stared at her. Unusual how? She turned the paper toward me. There was no medical explanation. Not from your condition, not from the procedure. The only variable was your pre-op sedative level. Closed my eyes. A cold wave rolled through me, slow, crushing. This was no longer paranoia. No longer suspicion. No longer fear twisting itself into shapes I couldn't fully trust. Someone had set the conditions for me to die. And that someone was my husband. Marin continued, her tone careful. We are forwarding this to the hospital's legal counsel, and, with your permission, to law enforcement. There are potential criminal elements here, including medical fraud, signature forgery, and possible attempted harm. I opened my eyes, tears blurring the edges of the room. He tried to kill me, I whispered. She didn't correct me, didn't soften it, didn't try to reframe it in gentler words. Because the evidence didn't allow gentleness. Instead, she nodded. The intent behind these actions appears deliberate. Deliberate. The word sliced through me, sharp and final. Everything clicked into place. The life insurance increase, the financial transfers, the affair, the forged signatures, the drink he pushed into my hands, the whisper in the recovery room. None of it was accidental. None of it was a misunderstanding. None of it was the result of a momentary lapse. It was a plan. A long, careful, calculated plan. The truth settled over me like a heavy, suffocating blanket. I wasn't supposed to survive the surgery. And the man who vowed to protect me had hoped I wouldn't. The day I was discharged from the hospital didn't feel like freedom. It felt like stepping onto a bridge that was still being built. Each plank laid just moments before my foot touched it. The nurses moved around me with a quiet sense of purpose, their instructions careful, their eyes lingering on the doorway as if expecting something, or someone to appear. Protective care, they called it. A temporary placement coordinated by the hospital and law enforcement, designed to keep me safe until the investigation reached a stage where I wouldn't be alone. Dana, the social worker, stood beside me as I was wheeled toward a secured exit rather than the main lobby. It's just precaution, she said, though her voice held a gravity that told me it was more than that. Your husband attempted to re-enter the building twice overnight. Security and local police were notified. Should have terrified me. Instead, a numbness had settled inside me, the kind that replaced panic with clarity. He wasn't done. I had expected that. Marcus wasn't the type to let go of a plan he'd spent months, maybe years, carefully constructing. Outside, an unmarked car waited. The officer standing by the passenger door offered a reassuring nod. We'll get you to the safe address. Nobody knows it except the investigative team. I shifted in my seat, feeling the strain of healing incisions, the tug of bandages. Everything hurt, but the pain was clean and honest, unlike the kind Marcus had inflicted. The nurse tucked a blanket around me, her touch gentle, almost motherly. You call us if you need anything. Day or night. I thanked her, unable to say more without my voice breaking. As the officer helped me into the car, my phone, My new temporary phone buzzed. Text message. The number was blocked, but the tone was unmistakable. We need to talk. I can explain everything. Don't leave. You're making a mistake. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. Even now, he framed himself as the victim of my choices. Even now, he insisted I owed him my attention, my presence, my vulnerability. I showed the message to the officer. He frowned, took a photo of the screen, and forwarded it to the case team. Classic manipulation, he muttered. He's losing control. They usually escalate before they go quiet. The car pulled away from the hospital, winding through back streets instead of main roads. I watched through the window as the building disappeared behind us. I should have felt relief, but leaving the hospital meant leaving the safety of walls, guards, and nurses. The world outside felt too open, too exposed. We were halfway to the safe location when it happened. A car appeared in the rearview mirror. Dark, familiar, speeding toward us in a way that sent every muscle in my body locking tight. The officer noticed it too. His posture shifted. His hand went to the radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12, he said calmly. "We may have a tail." The car behind us accelerated. Its driver honked once. Long, pressing, frantic. I didn't need to see his face to know it was Marcus. The desperation had reached its peak. The officer turned onto another street, then another, but the car stayed with us, weaving through traffic, gaining ground. "He's trying to force us to stop," the officer said. "Hang on." My breath caught. The seatbelt pressed into my healing abdomen as he took a sharp turn. Pain shot through me, hot and sudden, but I forced myself to stay still. I wouldn't give Marcus another victory. 2 police vehicles flashed into view ahead of us, lights spinning silently. They blocked the road just as the officer slowed to a controlled stop. Within seconds, the patrol cars behind us boxed in the car that had been following. Everything happened quickly after that. Doors flung open, officers shouting commands, Marcus yelling my name through the windshield of his car. His voice cracked between rage and desperation. "You're ruining us. Just talk to me. You're blowing everything up." But everything had already been blown up. He had done that himself. The officers pulled him from the car, restrained him, and read him his rights while he continued shouting accusations that sounded more like confessions. I watched through the window, trembling, not from fear but from the realization that the final attempt he warned me about, the one he couldn't articulate in messages or whispers, had just played out in front of me. Cornered, he had tried to put himself back in control the only way he knew how. Through chaos. The officer in my car glanced at me. "You're safe," he said. This was his last shot. I didn't fully believe it. Maybe I wouldn't for a long time. But as Marcus was placed in the back of a patrol car, his face twisted with a fury that finally had no place to land, something inside me loosened. The facade of our marriage, every carefully scripted moment, every manipulated memory, every manufactured promise, collapsed right there on the asphalt. The officer drove me to protective housing in silence. I stared ahead, breathing slowly, letting the truth settle. Leaving the marriage wasn't the end. It was survival. It was reclaiming my life. And it was the first decision Marcus would never control again. The days after Marcus's arrest moved both too quickly and painfully slow. I found myself living in a borrowed space, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood where the walls were soft beige and the air smelled faintly of lavender. The safe house wasn't luxurious, but it was steady, predictable. No creaking footsteps outside my door, no whispers in the dark, no tension humming beneath the surface. It was the first place in years where silence didn't feel like danger. Recovery became a ritual of small victories. Learning how to breathe deeply without wincing. Taking slow walks from one room to the next. Drinking water without nausea. My body healed at its own pace, but the deeper injuries, the ones carved into my confidence, my sense of self, my trust in my own memory, those took longer. Some mornings I woke with an unfamiliar stillness inside me, the absence of fear so foreign that I mistook it for emptiness. Other mornings I woke shaking, haunted by the sound of Marcus's voice, by the way he had said my name like it was something he owned. The therapist the hospital connected me with explained it gently. Trauma echoes. It repeats until you teach it a new rhythm. I didn't know who I was without Marcus's influence. Without his opinions shaping what I wore, how I spoke, who I saw, where I went, what I believed about myself. His control hadn't appeared all at once. It had crawled in slowly, like vines weaving through the cracks until they became the structure holding everything up. Now that it was gone, I needed to rebuild. First, the work felt impossible. I stared at old photos, some of me smiling, some of me looking small beside him, and realized how many versions of myself I had abandoned along the way. The woman who loved hiking. The one who painted on weekends. The one who used to laugh loudly, not quietly, not fearfully. Thought she was gone. But trauma doesn't erase people. It only buries them. And healing is the slow, patient excavation. The support came from unexpected places. Emily, the night shift nurse, visited on her day off with a bag of groceries and sat with me at the kitchen table, talking about anything except the case. Dana checked in every morning, sometimes with paperwork, sometimes with coffee. Even the officer who drove me from the hospital left a note on my file. Call anytime. You're not a burden. They weren't saving me. They were standing beside me while I learned how to save myself. The legal process unfolded quietly behind the scenes. Marcus faced multiple charges: fraud, attempted harm, forgery, reckless endangerment. I didn't need updates every day. I only needed the assurance that the system was moving in the right direction. For once it did. Meanwhile, I began choosing myself in small, tangible ways. I cut my hair shorter than I ever had, something he always hated. I bought a journal and wrote down thoughts that had spent years trapped behind caution. I reached out to an old friend I hadn't spoken to since Marcus encouraged me to distance myself. She cried when she heard my voice. Healing wasn't linear. Some days I felt strong, clear, emerging. Other days I felt like a ghost trying to re-enter my own life. But the difference now was that I didn't face those days alone, and I didn't face them while pretending nothing was wrong. One afternoon, weeks into recovery, I stood outside under the open sky. The sun felt warm on my skin, real, grounding. I closed my eyes and listened. No footsteps, no voices, no tension crawling up my spine. Just wind, birds, my own breathing. I realized then that the final chapter of this story wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving Marcus wrong or even about punishing him, though justice was finally doing what it should. It was about reclaiming the parts of myself I had forgotten, nurturing the ones that had survived, and choosing a life built on peace rather than fear. I didn't want the rest of my life to be defined by how close I came to dying. I wanted it to be defined by how I lived after surviving. Choosing myself wasn't a single decision. It was every decision. It was waking up and choosing to trust my instincts again. To set boundaries that didn't bend under pressure. To let people help without believing I owed them anything in return. To craft a life where safety wasn't borrowed, but built. Marcus had taken so much. Time, confidence, trust, pieces of my identity. But he didn't get the final piece. The one that mattered most. He didn't get my future. For the first time in years, maybe ever, I felt the weight in my chest loosen. I wasn't healed. Not completely. Healing is a long, winding road. But I was walking it. My pace. In my way. And every step forward was mine.